first thing that's really interesting to talk about is what is small, right? Like what does a small home mean? Because I think some people immediately rush to, it might conjure like a micro suite, in an apartment building or a little cottage in the country or something. And I think the best definition I've ever run across, and it's the one that we certainly hold as being the most meaningful and probably the most accurate, is that small is just enough. If you have a small home, that means that your home is functioning in a way where you have just what you need.
Welcome back to In the House podcast. I'm Tony Singh.
And I'm Jenny Woon.
We have a super special local guest today from Vancouver.
From Kitsilano.
Yeah, Kitsilano. Jake Fry, CEO of Smallworks Studio and Laneway Housing. Jake, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Principal and founder of Smallworks Studio. You started in 2005, and I'm going to give you a small introduction, but we do have an icebreaker question for you, Jake, which we always start off with. And the question is, what is your spirit animal?
My spirit animal? Oh, wow. That's, I would say a wolf.
Probably a wolf. We haven't had somebody who said wolf.
No, I like that. Why? We didn't ask people why, though. They should tell the audience why.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I would say, well, I grew up in a rural area. I grew up in a little hobby farm. And I have to say, I just always thought that, they were really beautiful animals. When I was a kid, which is, decades ago, they were still a critter that was, basically considered vermin or were hunted and thought to be like a inconvenience for neighboring farmers. And I always thought they were really beautiful and then read lots of books about them as a kid and just thought they were the best thing ever, so.
Very mystical and noble. So you started your firm in 2005 and you specialize in Laneway Homes. You're also the co-director and co-founder of Small Housing BC, where you work with a large team of passionate housing advocates and design professionals to push through small housing. So let's talk about what small housing is afterwards. But going back to years when you started in the construction industry, you started off with carpentry skills. Can you share with us that one moment, that whatever you remember when you first learned, that gave light to what you're doing today?
Sure. Well, so I had a background, as you said, I had a background of, I had actually probably a good 15 years where I worked in the film industry and had started off doing props and making things. And I'd always had carpentry as sort of my anchor. It was always there, something I could use to earn a living in. But I worked in film for a while. It was really engaging. I did well, actually even worked as an art director for a while, which I really enjoyed and had aspirations. But, I really kept getting drawn back to carpentry and I liked it. And it was very creative and saw lots of friends go through kind of anguish of trying to do things like make films. And I just thought, every day when you're doing this work, you're doing something that's creative, and it is something which had this immediate reward to it. And I really thought that was just, something that shouldn't be ignored. Sorry, I'm just putting away something here. So yeah, and just to go back, so I was doing carpentry but I was working in film. I was starting to get into more like art direction, and I liked it, but it was arduous, and there was more hassle than reward. And the one thing about carpentry making things is that every day you're actually seeing the fruition of your efforts. I relocated to Vancouver a little over 20 years ago, and started, well, I'm just going to follow this passion and I'll start a company. But I spent a couple of years working on really high end homes as a finisher carpenter, and there was this one moment, and a number of these homes, especially at that time, the homes we were working on were large, and they were unprecedentedly large at the time, like 10,000, 12,000 square foot. I know we've gone past that, but at the time that was almost inconceivable that there'd be private residences of that size. And I just remember this moment where I was working, was putting a difficult piece of crown molding up in a bathroom, and I was looking out this window at this beautiful, lush laneway. And I'd learned earlier that this house that was being built was um, not to take away anything from it, but it was really just going to house three people. And I was just looking around, thinking of all the resources that were being put into this home, and the fact that I was putting this very ornate crown molding in a bathroom. This kind of maybe drove home that this wasn't really what the type of work. This isn't what I wanted my efforts to be um, producing. And then I looked out there and I was thinking of all the beautiful little homes I'd seen because I used to travel a lot, and I always thought that those little nooks and crannies and those little backyard homes you would see, say, in eastern cities, or little what's around the little house around a corner down a European street they were always just beautiful, and or if they weren't beautiful, they were really interesting. And I just we could take this whole lane and fill it with this is beautiful walking street. They would have all these great little homes, and basically I just packed up my tools 3 days later and started Smallworks and said that's what I'm going to do.
Wow.
Amazing.
I've seen your signs over the years, many years, from some of the laneways you guys have done in Vancouver, because you guys are all over.
What's that one thing that you would say you leave a trademark on your homes? Like besides the sign. So is there, if you're walking down I know there's traditional, there's modern, one level, multi-level. Is there a signature feature on each home where when you pass Smallworks, you're going to be like, yeah, that was built by Smallworks?
Yeah, I have to say that's a really it's a I really appreciate that question because that's and I would say we had initially thought, well, we laser cut some aluminum um, logos, and we would put those in the homes for a while, and then we thought of other little elements we would do it. But I think in the end, where I had always really driven the design team to focus on is that every home should be simple and elegant. And meaning, from my perspective, that was things had a really perfect proportion, that things had a sort of a real subtle fit. And you're quite right, like we really do change up the aesthetics, between contemporary, formal, um, and and so to have a little hallmark that was always there was less. Um, it seemed to be more about us, right? And what we really wanted to do was create something that was going to be really great for the community. So we abandoned any of that. And so from my perspective, if you walk down a street and you see a home and you go, wow, that's just fits right. That's probably the best hallmark we could have left, and that's the hope. That's what we hope we're creating with the current cohort of models and custom homes that we build.
Are there different types of small homes that are available in British Columbia?
Well, yeah, there certainly are. I mean, I think the first thing that's really interesting to talk about is what is small, right? Like what does a small home mean? Because I think some people immediately rush to, oh, it might conjure like a micro suite, in an apartment building, or a little cottage in the country, or something. And I think the best definition I've ever run across, and it's the one that we certainly hold as being the most meaningful and probably the most accurate, is that small is just enough. If you have a small home, that means that your home is functioning in a way where you have just what you need to feel comfortable, to have that kind of emotional feedback you want out of a home. You have enough, you're able to have enough things in the home that um, it kind of satiates what you need to have a comfortable life, but there's nothing extraneous. So, with that said, I think there's any range of small homes. But when we think about the type of where our discussion stems from, which is that really, how do we use land a little better, and how do we create more housing that's attainable in across BC and across Canada for that matter? What we're really talking about is how do you take that single family lot and how do you add to that lot around with residential space that's actually going to have an impact and create, the fulfill the need that we have as these various communities. So within Vancouver, let's say the initiatives that I can think about, that focus on that and that kind of area of work tends to be obviously the laneway house is first and foremost because that has it is as prevalent as it is and it's been as successful as it is. Obviously, basement suites in a way kind of fall under that, although they're more secondary use. Um, but they're the character retention program, which the city's initiated, and prior to that, the heritage, what's called an HRA, but what basically even further preserving more heritage buildings. They've often had something which I think has been a definitely it in itself was kind of to reuse that word, a vanguard, because we were getting second units that people could then sell. And so these are small homes that are actually can be freehold. Um, and those I think are very important. And then what we're seeing now forthcoming, which, in no small part is based on advocacy work that we had done with Small Housing BC, as you're seeing the city now exploring as many as 5 to 6 units, um, all ground orientated on a single family lot, and those will definitely be, although they'll probably be within a larger structure. Those I think would definitely qualify as kind of smaller homes, right? Um, and then I think there's other things that we've yet to explore. Little row townhouses. We always thought it would be fantastic to be able to do row houses in lanes and have them as sort of an elder community, so that would be a way to kind of age in place or for young families to really start to have an opportunity to get some ownership. And what's really nice about these small housing initiatives is there's lots of places where you can put them in where they don't really well, they do two things. One, they repopulate neighborhoods because there's a lot of neighborhoods that have had sort of a suppression or a lowering of families per household or family. Well, the families have gotten smaller, the homes have gotten bigger. I mean, that's been the trend for the last 30 years. But we also have then these neighborhoods that were built for bigger population that are now underpopulated. And this is a way the small housing initiatives and little things like row houses or row houses on corner lots, those are a way to really start to invigorate the neighborhoods and start to make them more resilient and get them back up to the population they should be at, let alone address the population growth that we have as an ongoing problem.
So would you say that recently the outside aesthetics of the small homes, as well as the efficiency of the interior, have become something even more important over the last couple of years?
Well,
I guess usability of space too, right? For an
well,
outdoor.
yeah, I think there's a few things for sure, and it's a bigger topic. That's not really answered in one question, but I will say 100%. If we look at housing and we look at market trends, if we went back, say, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and we were at was at a conference in Ottawa, they're talking, the Canadian Home Builders Association talking, well, what's the single biggest factor in house buying? And at the time, it was a walk-in closet. That's what market research was telling people, and so you have to respond to what people need, but then you also have to scale it into something that's really usable. Um, and so what's a walk-in closet mean? And you have to kind of examine that when you think of a small home, because you're not going to make a 10 by 12 closet in a 1,000 square foot home. It wouldn't work. But the idea of, well, here I need privacy. I need a place to kind of where my wardrobe is something that I look at. It. My wardrobe's important. It's part of what I need to do to establish my place in the world, and whatever those drivers are. And then you go, well, how can we make this work in a standard bedroom? How can we approach something like a little differently? How can we use a space which is already smaller than a full home, but how can we get that emotional uh, sensibility into the small space, and what can we provide? And so a lot of the small house things to go to your porch, and some of the small house initiatives are really like, how do we create that play between private and public space? How do we get spaces doing more than one thing? And how do we do it in a way where we're not having to be Mr. Gadget and there's some magical button you hit and walls move and stuff like that, which is, there's been lots of initiatives of that. And we see little video and Instagram clips of these really super cool converting pieces of millwork. But, that's not really attainable to a lot of people because it's expensive and it's also kind of problematic. And to be honest, most people, when they're in their house, they don't want to have to do a whole bunch of work just to open up their closet or to change their living room. So it's more incremental things. And I tell you, one of the biggest pieces of inspiration when anyone who starts with us as a designer, I give them old catalog books from the 20s because the homes were smaller, so much smaller in the 20s. And but at the same time, their layout of those homes were really uh, quite astute and very smart, and they were very accessible. And there's a lot of lessons there, And I think if we look at, say, the 80s or the 90s in housing, when people say we're buying Victorians and ripping down walls and making these big rooms, all we ended up doing was creating another industry for couch makers to make bigger couches because everything just got scaled up. But there was nothing that was gained out of that change, that kind of big open concept. People wanted to have more space, but those big rooms alienated you.
Right. Do you think the idea of adding space equated to the success of your family, of your income? Maybe it correlated with that idea?
Well, I think so my answer to that is that we can't lose sight, I think, often that a lot of what our aspirational goals are in this culture that we live in is a very heavily marketed, and it's a very manufactured emotional response. And but you sit there with a cup of tea and you're sitting in a little window seat and you're reading your favorite book or you're just daydreaming looking out the window. Those are the things that are pretty meaningful, and those are the things that no marketing campaign is going to drive you to feel one way or the other about. And that's really at the core. If I think about what we're trying to create for somebody, it's that they will find that kind of level of comfort in our house somewhere. And clearly, I think, maybe going back to an earlier question, the counterpoint is that now I think it's very difficult for any of us not to have carry with us some sense of impact to the environment, whether it's the social environment we live in, certainly, the environment, quote unquote, when we think of, environmental impacts of greenhouse gases and our quite large population we have on the planet right now, and the need to be cautious with our resources. I think there's something, especially in people of your age and younger, where that's a really big driver. And people who are kind of on the other side, towards in a post-retirement, let's say, I think that a lot of those people just generally need less too and want less. They want, there's a liberty that comes with not being shackled to belongings, or an overburden of belongings, perhaps is a better way to put it. And I think that's where this movement and this kind of need is really being driven out of those two cohorts, right? I mean, when you're in your 40s and you have a big family, I mean, obviously your needs for space and volume are completely understandable. But when you're starting off and when you're kind of winding down, your need for space is different. And I think people are recognizing that maybe that my that kind of generation that I'm in, the sort of the Joneses generations, as it's called these days, where you were keeping up with the Joneses. That's a little less. It's a little less of a driver these days, and I think even the marketing world's kind of finally cluing into that.
Mm.
That was so yesterday. It's keeping up with the Kardashians now.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah. We were talking before we started. There's about more than 7,000 laneway homes in Vancouver. and that stat could be old, and you've built over 300, so you have quite a bit of market share there. I know you've mentioned in another podcast that I was listening to that you work with a very specific market, and you're very particular with who you select to bring on as a client. So how many do you actually build in a year, and what kind of clients do you like to work with?
Well, I would say the company has a capacity, and I will say we haven't really ever hit this number. So I just want to be, I just want to be forthright about that. But there's a route forward where our growth strategy would have us building maybe as many as three a month, maybe four. If I was to think of it, I mean, we'd have to do a little bit of scaling, but we wouldn't have to change what we do per se to do that. We'd have to have. Right now, we're comfortably building 20. Um, we are sort of set up and set up to do 24, and that would be a banner year for us to 30. That's kind of a banner year, and we've hit those numbers before. um, Obviously right now it's a bit challenging just with the post-pandemic, or as we're getting there in supply chain and kind of getting resettled in a slightly different environment than we were a few years ago, or 2 years ago and a half. um, so that's kind of our capacity. And when we look at where we're at and what we cater to, there's a couple of things. So about 3/4 of the laneway homes that are built tend to just be built when someone builds a new house. And so what our company specializes in is that we really want to build for those people who want to, I'll preface it, part of this is this, something I feel really passionate about, and just for the time being, we're on the, sort of driving the cart. I get the luxury of making these choices, but I really believe that maintaining principal residences when possible, when we think of environmental impact, is really important. Like, why take down a house when and it's a huge environmental kind of draw to even take down a house, let alone build a house in its place. So what we do is we go, well, we're going to just work, and we're just going to do those infill ones. So we're going to work for those people who want to keep their main house and just build an infill. So that kind of qualifies that market. So that's only about a third of what's been built or is planned to be built, at best, maybe even 20%. But where we sit is we know we're at the high end of the market. We deliver what I think is an exceptional product, but we're doing that exceptional product at a pretty competitive rate for what it is. And if you were going to a private architect and you wanted to duplicate that house, and you went to a fellow who might build an off his pickup truck or have a small construction company, we're going to deliver that product a little better, a little quicker, and probably a little more cost effective. And I don't think we purposely do this, but inherently what we tend to find that our biggest cohort of people who are drawn to us are, I would say, first and foremost, it's a young couple. They may have the resources either through employment, or they bought a condominium, where they can comfortably afford a home that might be $500,000, and but they have the opportunity to then take that money and build a really beautiful home in one of their parents' or a relative's backyard, or they bought a property with a friend, and they're jointly doing this. Someone's going to live in the main house, and they're going to build this new house in the back. That's probably our biggest client. And I would say, I'm not going to say they're our best client, but I know that what we do fulfills their needs like really well. And I think we do that better than anybody else. And I'll just put that out there. And I think that, so inherently it's just a good fit. The other cohort of client tends to be somebody who's kind of has a similar narrative. Maybe they sold a house in Kerrisdale and they're going to build a house on their kid's property. Maybe they have a property in one of the Gulf Islands, and they're going to rent their main house, but they want to have a pied à terre in Vancouver. So that's our other main client. And I would say those two. There's other things. I think it's interesting. We're at a kind of this little moment where it's happening too, where prices have gone up. As everything, we have inflation looming, and I think where we're now going to see a shift, although it's not a big shift, but I think there'll be a real focus on that kind of multi-generational living. And I attest, and I think it's completely accurate, that if you own a piece of property, or own a good percentage of it, you may still have a mortgage. the best investment you can do to hedge against inflation is to consolidate family money. And it's also to put in a laneway house, which is given housing needs and given sort of investment return, that's really going to be the most secure and probably the most rewarding investment you can make with that level of input, right? Even with insurance, with interest rates going up a little bit, it's an incredibly viable option.
It's interesting that you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned that. We've had recent conversations with more of our clients about generational wealth and, aging parents, young families at the same time. And it's a great option to be able to have, if you're a close family, everyone close together with their own privacy, but also, on the same lot. Interestingly enough, we just got a letter in the mail today, no,
Mm-hmm.
yesterday, for Burnaby. Burnaby's been looking at the possibility of laneway homes for the last 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
and they still haven't officially implemented it. However, it looks as though the municipality is moving towards that as well. So I have a question then, Jake. If walk us through the experience. If I'm the client and I come to you and I fit the criteria of wanting to keep my existing home, build a laneway in the back, what is what are the costs kind of going to look like? What would the process look like from, talking about the property to completion of the laneway house? And I guess, yeah, how does that work?
Well, so we are a full service company, and so generally, if I was to walk you through our whole procedure, we have these conversations amongst ourselves. We understand and try and grasp who our efforts are best going to serve, and we market to those individuals, and a lot of it's digital marketing. Although we have historically had lots of open houses and try to create a sense of community engagement. So we're reaching the people who are interested in us, and then what happens out of that process is we'll get somebody who's interested in a client. They'll come to us, we'll tour some houses, we'll tell them what's involved, they'll tell us what they need, and we'll make sure it's a good fit. And it's not like we're screening clients that we only, we just want to make sure we're going to be able to fulfill what they want effectively. um, and then what we have now and what we've introduced lately is, because of these issues that we were just talking about, we've introduced and we've really reflected on our, these past, well, if we think of designs, probably 350 designs that we've done, but we certainly, as I said, executed over 300 of them. We think of those and we've come up with a group of classic models. And these are the homes that we think really are outstanding, and they're not necessarily the cheapest homes, and we're not doing, oh, this is the bottom of the shelf and you can get this. Yeah, it's got a couple of tears in it, but it's good to go. It's not like these are like our best homes, right? And we go, these are the homes that we can really, with great assurity, tell you where we're gonna end up price wise. And so we'll talk about that. We'll show those clients the homes, and to be honest, we really think clients are best served by picking one of those homes and allowing us to move forward with it. But we do custom units as well. And so someone really wants something specific, or they have a challenging site, or they have something they really want to do, then we'll go in a custom stream. That's more of a conventional build, where we can give some sense of cost assurity, but obviously we're going to have to create some level of cost plus. Anyway, so that process, we start in that process. It'll have different streams. We're still heavily advocating the City of Vancouver to give us the ability to come in with the same plan and allow that to go through the permitting process quicker, but it does it at this point. So I would say when someone says, yeah, well, I want to build with you, it takes us about a year to 8 months to go, okay, well, we got to get the survey, we're going to do, and then of course we do all the whatever design work, whatever custom or one of these classics. We completely personalize the inside, so we have a selection of interior finishes that we go through or source for people. And then once we get a building permit, a couple of months later, we should be able to start the process. Generally speaking, in this current environment, where there has been some supply chain issues, we're budgeting about 32 weeks to build a standard one of these classic homes. The custom homes might take more. Like we've had some that are just, we've had homes that are custom because they have very expensive finishes, like $200,000 in zinc siding, other ones that are very expensive because we're having to support another house and a whole lane, physical lane with concrete as we build the home because of a slope or something. But generally, that 30 weeks, and we've done better. When the city was less. There's been some things on the part of the city where the homes are a bit more complicated. I mean, I can tell you our benchmark for a really beautiful home used to be 20 weeks. It's now kind of 30 in this current environment. And that's kind of where we're at right now. So generally, I'd say it's a year and a half to a year and 3/4 if someone came to us to when we can actually have them in the home.
Good to know.
Jake, I want to just share with you that I really respect the values of your business and where you're going with this because I just came from I just visited the spring home and garden show and Buildex. And, they're for the mass market, they're for, I guess, kind of maybe like the average home user. But I kind of find through this conversation and reading through what you advocate that a lot of it is trying to educate and work with those that also value sustainability and high density and increasing housing needs rather than more profit driven ideas. Am I correct to say that? I'm getting the sense of that.
My accountant would say that for sure.
Yeah, just being like my earlier question about being selective, I'm not saying that you say no to a lot of clients. It's more just you want to work with clients that value your experience and your what you've endured over the years since the early 2000s to really increase the awareness of promoting small housing and clusters and having this urban type of living where it forms like a really good community of people.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. That's lovely, and that is indeed what I hope we're doing. I think, and maybe touching a little bit on our work in Small Housing BC, which is a not-for-profit I started in 2012, and really it was on the success of the Laneway House, because we were getting lots of calls from other places, and people were really feeling that they were missing something in the housing market, and there was just something that wasn't there, and so our work really has been that not-for-profit. I would say now, reflecting on it, the terminology that I would use is we're really trying to take a look at how cities work that typically have a downtown core and then they have this kind of suburbanish kind of layout. And I think Vancouver is much like that, where we have these beautiful tree-lined streets and we have these, really kind of, you call it kind of living environments where people have a lot of green space and go, well, what can we do in those single family lots that doesn't take away from that emotional, but starts to accommodate more accessibility for more people. And I think it's really important when we look at things like the opportunities we might have to create housing that's below market, that it happens in that environment and it happens nested within communities. And because let's face it, if you're a teacher, if you're a couple and you're both teachers, you need subsidized housing in Vancouver, which is harsh place to be, right? And even ourselves, we've had and continue to have really a strong team-based um, uh, cohort of colleagues at work, but we've had attrition primarily around housing, which is, that's a um, tough place to be when you think that that's our actual activity, right? It's like, being a tailor and losing clients because losing staff because they can't afford your clothes, right? Or afford clothing in general, not even your clothes. Um, so
So what would you say would be the biggest challenge to building small housing that you keep getting pushed back on?
I think that the biggest challenge is and I don't think it's any one thing, but I do feel that we are we're in a system across the province which looks at, and it's not everywhere, but I'll just say if I was to come up with a generalization, I think we have a housing system and a regulatory system around housing that inherently is protectionist or restrictive. And so the decision makers are making decisions, I think, well intending, and many of them are trying to be forward looking, but at the same time, the balance of that is that they're working under a system where they have political masters, and politicians can be both visionary, but I think at the end of the day, most politicians don't want to do something that's going to cause them um, the discomfort, a level of discomfort that's going to compromise their ability to be political leaders.
Real
So,
elected.
yeah, exactly.
And um, I think we're just at one of these watershed moments or sea changes where that concern, which is, well, not in my neighborhood, I don't want here, I want things to stay the same. I think we're at one of those watershed moments where that is going to um, we're not going to have that kind of pushback. And I think people want something new. So I think we're in an opportunity here, but I think historically um, that has been the challenge, is that people are like, well, that's a good idea, but we can't really do that here because of this and this reason, right?
Hmm.
I would have to agree with you. No, I was just going to say that I would have to agree with your assessment on that. And I guess then my question would be, in your opinion, how should we be approaching
Hmm.
housing today, um, in regards to what you're saying, advocating for, sustainability, efficient use of housing, and how it addresses community as well?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you one idea we're working with right now at Small Housing BC, and obviously Smallworks hopefully will be intricate to this. Is we did a feasibility study for the city of Vancouver, or with them, maybe about 5 years ago now, and the idea was, what if we were to take a typical city lot and allow maybe not a lot more density, but maybe about 20-25% more density, but then open it up for more households within that square footage, keep everything ground orientated, and rather than take the extra, we'll call it profit, off the land, and drive that either into a revenue stream in which the city would take some of that, the typical sort of DCC, CACs. Let's take that land value and subsidize one of the units so that it's in perpetuity affordable to that mean income earner. So in Vancouver, a family that might make between $80,000 and $100,000. So they're working at a coffee shop making the new minimum wage. Um, or we created three of those units that were affordable for the Housing Hub program. So they would basically, they're wage earners who could afford um, market value home. Granted, that home's going to be a little smaller, 8 or 1,000 square feet, um, and but they don't have the money to have a deposit on that, but they can afford it, and so the Housing Hub money would help them with that. So those are things that we're really strongly believe in, and so we're working with. Right now, we're doing a pilot program with Nelson, Coquitlam, and Kelowna. And in those cases, what we're doing is, look, we have an idea of what this program can be, but let's cater it to what your need is in that community, and not go, well, everyone's going to look like this or everyone's going to look like that, or it has to be this, because we know we need, communities should have some control over what goes into their communities, and it should fit within their communities. But the idea is, okay, let's just take this raw concept and see how it works. And I think that's the type of thinking that we need. We need to move away from cities allowing development because development produces revenue, to cities facilitating development that then produce social housing, but that social housing comes out of, or maybe even a better term, although I'm just trying to think of what we call a better term, but let's call it community, housing that reinforces communities, and that has to happen at a project level, right? But I solely, and I mean wholeheartedly, maybe is a better way to put it, feel that if this is done incrementally in small iterations, And that small iterations, if it works, then it can become widespread. And that widespread uptake and shift in this kind of suburban um, and retrofitting of suburban layout, that's where the strength will come, right? And it will be so much more meaningful than going, oh, hey, we're going to build a whole bunch of high rises on a major arterial, and then we're going to try and negotiate. We're going to ask for 20, but we're going to settle for 8% of those being um, somehow affordable, right? And I think that's where, I think that's where the strength of this idea lies. And it's not lost on me. Here we are 100 years after sort of that first wave of suburban kind of creation, and these cities that are like Vancouver of this kind of age, which in many respects were a reaction to that pandemic of the influenza after the First World War. And here we are 100 years later. And you know what? That happened for a reason. And that was actually a very fruitful thing that happened. Let's, maybe it's not lost on me that maybe are not reinventing the wheel, but we're going back to a viable solution, and we're just recontextualizing something 100 years later, and building on something that we knew worked then, and we can try it again and just do it different, but it's somewhat the same.
Out of curiosity, why Nelson and Kelowna are the politicians a little bit more forward thinking and willing to work with some of the programs that you guys are advocating?
Well, I think there are other communities that um, would have been good contenders. We had, in Canada, we had a bit of a relationship from past projects where we'd worked with those that are not-for-profit, had worked with those cities. Um, they were the ones that expressed interest, and it met with other programs that they were doing. It was just, I won't say happenstance, and I won't say I will say, I think Kelowna is exceptional. They probably, of the communities across BC, are the most progressive, and they deserve a shout out for that. They've been doing some amazing work, and they're very forward thinking. And not that others aren't, but they have the resources, and it's their sort of moment in the sun. Um, but I think there's other communities that would have equally benefited, and we wanted to get a blend as well. Like that's a really nice cross section of communities. Nelson, which is this beautiful, quaint, somewhat isolated, just a little bit. Community with smaller community needs, and then Kelowna, which is this very progressive, and then very much kind of and I don't mean this in any sort of slight, but a very sort of commuter-based community, and that has a very traditional kind of suburban layout that you'd have in Coquitlam. So they were a nice blend to go, well, how would this idea work here, and how would it work there?
Yeah. And so how would you design a home, a small home, especially if we're trying to push something like 300 square feet, 200
Hmm.
square feet, how would you design that home for an occupant that has like disability or
Hmm.
handicap accessibility?
hmm Well, to be forthright, we don't do too much at that small square footage. I would say I think the sweet spot for the type of homes that meet whom we've been talking about to date, on the really small side, is maybe 600 square feet. And on the larger is probably, we don't really do too much. It's much larger than 1,200 square feet. Um, so, but when it comes to accessibility, I mean, there are some real, known sort of standards that have to be met, if we're talking like truly accessible. Um, and you do need a bit of square footage. I mean, to do something really small for somebody in a wheelchair, I think is somewhat compromising to that space. You need a good sized bathroom. You need to have accessibility. If it's a mobility and they're in a wheelchair, you need that. And you need cabinetry that allows a chair to get up to the counter, and that requires a bit of space. I do think that those 300, 200 square foot ones that we see, say, in some of the micro lofts, um, they're good. And I think some of the layouts of someone like John Stovall and his company Reliance, they've done really amazing work. I mean, they're great, and they deserve a lot of credit. Um, but I have to say, and I don't mean to be it would be pretty hard to think about raising a family in that space, and it's also, it would be we tend to think, we want to make sure when we build something that someone could spend the bulk of their life in if they wanted to. If it was meeting their needs, we want it to be that kind of level of connection for them. And I think it's reasonable to think that within this culture and within that kind of demographic we talked about, that 300 square feet starts to get a bit tough for that.
That's fair. That's
Hmm.
fair.
We
Mm-hmm.
talked about higher density and, specifically along rapid transit routes like the Broadway subway. That's causing a lot of disruption if you have to go down that way. Um, but with the transit being in there for students, it would allow them to live off campus more and still be able to get to UBC in a quick amount of time. What would you like to see differently with homes surrounding that subway line towards UBC?
Well, I guess, yeah, no, it's a good question. So, I think some of the things I'd like to do. Well, first of all, I think the the I think that I couldn't begin to underestimate the importance or overspeak the importance of public transit. It's imperative, and I think it really transitions any city into a better place with accessibility. Even if you can't tackle, I mean, it's something as simple as you can't tackle um, affordable land values. The one thing you could certainly do is make things more cost effective and to allow for more people to be able to live in a city is to make the reliance on the car reduced, you know, and minimized and ideally even eliminated as something that's required for transit within the city itself. Um, the it's I'm a little hesitant to answer your question only because I think it's really important that there is a level of density around transit. I think it's fundamental. It answers those things. Uh, I think what I'm more interested in and how I would want to answer that question is more, I'm really focused on the importance of what happens a block away from that transit. And I think typically we think about kind of a pyramid. Oh, it's really tall buildings, semi-tall buildings, and then all of a sudden we get back to businesses normal 3 blocks away. And I'm more interested in going, no, let's fill out further more gently, and let's create some equitability on people being able to have a nice park and
Options.
It's a
and
Yeah.
great
two
answer,
and
Jake.
2 steps to be able to get into a nice lawn chair with some sun on your face, right? Um, let's create that kind of connection to the land and to the neighborhood. And it's a privileged thing we have to live here, and it's reasonable that we should extend that privilege as wide as possible.
I
Hmm.
kind of find I was just recently selling 12 townhomes in at Arbutus and 7th, and the Arbutus SkyTrain station really does apply that concept. Is the station itself on Broadway, then we have the school on the left side, then the park.
Hmm.
I forgot what the name of the park is. Then you go down, and then that's where Kai was built, which is the 12-unit townhome that I worked on. Then there was uh, a mix of like residential
Hmm.
townhomes slash a small coffee shop on the corner. Then you go a couple more blocks, then you're hitting 4th, and then you can lay out the lawn chairs at Kitts Beach.
Yeah,
So if we
yeah.
saw that block by block and going east and west, I think it'll be
I think it would add a lot of character. It would
achieve what
feel
you're really
lovely.
saying.
Oh yeah,
Hmm.
completely. And I love that, I think someone who's done exceptional work in the townhouse work is Jim Bussey over at Formworks and Formworks Boutique, and they have one. Gosh, I think it's its second in Cypress or Maple. It's an old house, and they did it in the character or heritage program. It's an old house that turned into a duplex, and then he has a little beautiful, and it's nicely scaled. This is really nice little townhouse that goes across the side. It's on a corner lot. I mean, I look at something like that and I go, there's nothing that's undermining this neighborhood with this. This is adding something to the neighborhood. Aesthetically, it's adding something. He does beautiful work, but um, it's also um, this its physical presence gives a nice gravitas to the neighborhood. And I think when we're dealing with that sort of 2.5 house size, and not nothing that doesn't go above a house. We start to look at that kind of everywhere. I think we really start to get something that is so um, it's neighborly. Like it produces a strong neighborhood without overwhelming. Because you get to this point, starts to become alienating when it's something's really tall. But there's also a scale where something can kind of become somewhat of a fortress in the front, and then you have other scale where it's a little smaller, a little different proportion, and all of a sudden you have something that's much more subtly. It's subtle, but it's much more welcoming, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
And that's where
it's a
I think that's
lovely
what small
stroll to
housing.
walk through.
Yeah, to go back to one of your first questions, I think that's really what we're striving for with these small housing ideas, is to create something
Hmm.
that's
Makes sense.
charming and welcoming.
Are there any incentives or grants to participants who decide to construct like small housing on their property? Is that available to landowners?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know if there's any programs at this point. I mean, I look into the future, let's call it. I think I think one of the things which would be really interesting, um, and well worth contemplating, is really starting to allow some stratification of these lane homes. And my hope would be that if something like that happened, it may not apply to Vancouver, but in other communities, again, the opportunity for housing hub money, to be that type of subsidy where you get some, a little snapshot of the program from my perspective is that if you qualify, basically you're assisted with the financing of your deposit, and then that's money that the province is sort of, for lack of a better term, kind of betting on the real estate market, because they'll ride the market with you. And if they put in a percentage of what the value is of the house, and they get their money back when you go to sell it, and they'll actually even make a bit of profit if you've made profit on your home, and they take the risk of a loss as well. But I think that would do so much to get people into that home ownership stream and that's important. I mean, we look at this is, I really think, something that I don't know if it's talked enough about, is that we often talk and we look to somewhere like Venice, where there's, or not Venice, Vienna, where there's, most people don't own a home. Most people live in a secure rental, and they're very happy to do that. But one of the reason they're happy to do that is because they can take their money and they can invest it in whatever investment that might mean, whatever means they mean, and they can secure kind of what happens to their financial stability with the fact that this rental is secure. We don't have that in North America. We don't think that way. And to look at those models and to apply it here and say, well, we should just do this here, it's tough. And I think it's swimming too hard against the current. I think it's much more important, to if we want a secure population and we want a population that can weather periods of inflation and recession, um, it's really getting people into that ownership environment, or at least that spectrum of the housing, that those those people who historically in my lifetime have been able to get into home ownership, are able to do so, and it's within their capacity to do it in the neighborhoods that they choose, or the cities that they live. And that's been really tough. It hasn't really happened, and that's something where I think at a provincial level efforts have to be made forward to facilitate that, because I think something like a stratified laneway house program, um, that starts to, somewhere like Vancouver, that might open up as many as 30,000, 40,000 homes. And you're not going to build that. You're not going to get that level of home ownership by building big towers along an arterial because of a subway line.
Mm-hmm.
Right, right. Let's go back to Smallworks Studios. And you've been in the business, you started this like 17, 18 years ago. And you mentioned it's a full service company,
Mm-hmm.
very customer centric. So, how many employees do you have? Like, what's your business structure? Um, you know, what's the talent look like?
Well, the talent looks talented. um, but yeah, so what we have is, we have around 20 employees, and we have some administrative office staff. So we have a management team of 6 people, And so we have obviously bookkeeping and so forth. Myself, we have a pretty dynamic sales team. Some of it are we have a sort of a head of marketing and sales. He has a couple of people working with him, but more also some pretty interested contracted companies that deal with a lot of our social media. And then we have an operations team with a manager, and they're really putting the projects together and going through the logistics and getting them ready for construction. We have a fantastic woman by the name of Chanel Curry, who is our head designer, and she has two people working underneath her, and they're one fellow's an architect from Winnipeg. I have to say, the one funny thing about our company is we're very kind of international. We just everyone seems to be from somewhere else, and we recently hired this architect from Argentina who's great. It's Ivan. He's amazing, but he's the fellow who's actually I think he has this. I don't know if he's still current, but he was a certified architect in Winnipeg, where he went to school. And then we have our construction team, and so a fellow by the name of Peter Pelche is our director of construction. He has 3 site supers working for him, and they each have a team underneath them. Obviously, the focus on the construction and doing that, it's a big part of what we do, because it's all about the fruition of the prep work. But then generally what we tend to do is we have we have the same trades working with us all the time, and we sort of have repeat. We're not tendering every job. We have a pretty core team group of people who've worked together for a decade. So if I was to look at everybody involved, there's probably about 60 people involved in the company, with the core staff being about 20, roughly 20. And as I said, we take someone from marketing. We work them right through the design phase. We get the building permit. We're looking after all that work, and then of course we execute the project, and then we're there for warranty work afterwards. So.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah,
That leads into our next question.
Yeah.
Just 2 more questions, and then we're gonna do something fun if you're up for it, and if you have the time. Okay. Just for our viewers that are interested in perhaps building a laneway for themselves, or family members that might want to, what would the cost difference be for, just approximate, a single level laneway versus a multi-level laneway? Because obviously the building costs would be higher. And also, what type of warranty comes with a laneway home?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question, and I'm going to say that no, it is, because there's not a clear answer, because this is the problem, Jenny, is that if you look at the difference with what we build, as I said, sort of it's in Vancouver, it's this variance of sizes. Usually, it's a little over 600. It's never more than about 1,000. And I say this, it'll sound cheeky, but honestly, when we look at the material difference between those 2 houses, it would probably fit. You probably fit all that material that's required in 2 or 3 pickup truck loads. I mean, it's not much material between the activity and the pouring of the concrete, everything. Honestly, we built 600 square foot homes that are 40% more expensive than a 1,000 square foot home, just because of a choice of doors or windows or special siding. So, I would say
Well,
the
it's good that
benchmark.
you're answering it this way. It's true in any type of construction. Yeah.
Yeah, and you really, when people ask square foot price, we can't give you a square foot price, because it's not going to reflect what happens in those difference of the 2 buildings. So I would say, if you were going to do a laneway house with us, you're paying, for the house. This isn't all the other services that go with it, not getting the permit or the permit fees or anything, but this the house. You're probably paying at least $300,000 for the most basic house, and the most elaborate house at the basic finish is probably only $30,000 or $40,000 more. So let's say $350,000. Now, what I will say is, we are going through a bit of a price change, and so some of this I have to qualify that, because when someone has a conversation with me 6 months from now, it might be a little different. But there's at least $100,000 that's added to that when we look at the city permit fees, which are very expensive. They're really going up, and they're I'm not going to say they're half of that money, but they're a big percentage of that money. Well over 25%. And then our fees to get the permits. And then when we look at if we start to add landscaping and some of the other sort of finishing things that we need to do, and involving professional as engineers and surveyors, they all have an incremental value on that, and an impact. But what I will say is that even at the higher price point, if you're building a laneway house and you're even just doing it as an investment and you're looking to rent it, it's still a very profitable endeavor. And if you're looking to do it for family, and we think of that impact on family wealth and what type of housing that you're providing your family, or you're facilitating them to look after them, you're facilitating the land use. There's just nothing in the market that touches what a laneway house gives you at that price point. I mean, there's it's not like how you look at a high end condo. What is that living arrangement like compared to living in a 1,000 square foot house in someone's backyard in Kerrisdale, close to a school where your kids can go to? You just can't compare it.
100%. And the warranty, sorry, is it 2510?
It's 2510, but we have a on staff person who deals with deficiencies that come up and warranties, and we're pretty prompt about looking at everything. And I had a call from somebody 2 days ago. We built a house for 10 years ago, with a kind of a warranty thing that came up, and we were happy to look after it. I think we built them something in 2012. So I'm not going to say it's always the case, but certainly we're there as a partner. And let's face it, I live locally, and to be honest, I love going shopping. I like cooking, but I go shopping a lot of the times. I always run into someone we built for. We always have a nice conversation, and we talk about our kids getting older, and I'm a community member, and I thoroughly enjoy that. That's my role in Vancouver, is to be there to, as my colleague Rob likes to say, we make friends along the way. That's what we're here for. It's part of our role as a company, is to be there as an active member of the community, and to do something knowing that we're going to have to talk to that person 20 years from now, and we want it to be a great conversation, right?
Fantastic.
Well,
Yeah.
Jake, you are inspiring me, and you're inspiring a lot of people in the neighborhood. So our first rapid fire question is, what inspires you?
Um, Books.
Okay.
You got lots right
I
behind
know,
you.
I see those. Next question. If you were not building small homes, what would you be doing?
Oh, the fantasy part of me is sailing around the world. Or playing, or living in some, remote bush settlement in California, playing guitar, and looking at the grass grow.
And you ride a motorcycle as well.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's kind of a consistent fun thing.
He's like, how did you know that about me? What's your favorite way to celebrate life with your wife?
Oh, we just love going down to the beach and just looking at the water. I think the two of us could sit at the beach side watching waves come in for like at least an 8 hour stint and not get bored.
Hmm.
Awesome. Describe yourself in 3 words.
Small house evangelist.
Perfect.
If you were given unlimited funds and resources to push a new housing policy through, what specific problem or issue would you tackle?
Uh, I think it's what we had our discussion today around. I really believe this whole creating multiple dwellings on a single lot, and then having those ones have to produce affordability. That's I'm throwing everything into that. I think it's the idea of the future, to be honest.
Hmm.
Love it.
Hmm.
And our last question, where can our listeners find you?
Well, smallworks.ca. That's there. We love our website, and it's. I think it really a good 10 minutes on that website tells you a lot about our company and who we are.
Perfect.
Thank you, Jake. Well, here in Vancouver, obviously, we face a lot of issues like population growth and environmental sustainable issues. We thank you so much for pushing this through and being an advocate for making homes more attainable for people.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important with the issues. Us being real estate agents in the business, we're finding more and more
Mm-hmm.
buyers, and they're not just buyer fatigue because they can't find the home that they want and they can afford, but just being unreachable and unattainable
Yeah.
in their goals. So we really appreciate what you do.
Oh, thanks. Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure. It was nice getting to know you and having this conversation. I've done these quite a bit, and this has been my most enjoyable one. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Jake.
Thank you so
We'll talk
much.
to you soon.
Okay.